Ask Reddit. What celebrities have you encountered that were either really nice or really horrible? Part 1. Flava Flav ate at the restaurant I worked at once. He made a huge deal about having to sit somewhere private because he didn't want any attention. When it came to paying his bill, he tried to pay with a prepaid Visa that did not have enough money on it. I saw him at a bar in New Orleans during the Jazz Fest once. My buddy insisted that we ask him if he wanted to smoke a joint with us. He declined, saying there were too many people around. Then he asked me if I wanted to buy him a drink. I also declined. My only experience with Guy Fieri thus far was cordial. I did a guest presentation for us and took plenty of photos. But every time there's a wildfire or other depressing thing going on around here, he has his second responder crew ready to feed and care for all the first responders. This needs to be higher up. People like to make fun of his persona, but he uses what he has to truly help others. Samuel L. Jackson at the Calgary Stampede in Canada. He was super nice. My family went up for it because my uncle is part of the committee that organizes the Stampede every year, and he got us VIP seating. I was a kid at the time, and I was like, "Does your wallet really say OBAMF?" He laughed and said he left that one at home. Of course, when I told the story at school, I told everyone his wallet did in fact say that. Glad to say he's from my hometown. Leslie Jordan is from your hometown too. Are you watching his hilarious Instagram posts every day? I think the whole country is. All of these were waiting tables. Waited on Gene Wilder for his birthday years ago. He was incredibly nice and laughed so hard he cried when I told him we had everlasting pistachio ice cream. Betty White was hilarious and tipsy after wine and would not stop flirting. If I had been 60 years older. Neil Patrick Harris was also graceful as humanly possible. Insisted we have a drink with his table while we waited on him, and tipped like a champ. Seth MacFarlane was amazing. Drew me an original cartoon and signed it there at the table. After paying and tipping 100%, he refused to let me buy him a shot of whiskey and instead bought me one, then invited us to meet him out later. I met Vin Diesel at a truck stop diner when I was a kid. It was like 4 in the morning and me, my grandpa, and Vin and his friend were the only ones in the diner, and we ended up getting sat at the table next to them. Vin and a friend were getting ready to go on some fishing trip, which was made obvious by the clothes they were wearing. My grandpa struck up a conversation about fishing with him, completely oblivious to who he was. He was a really nice guy and apparently knew a great deal about fishing techniques. I was a bit geeked out and didn't say much or contribute to the conversation, but I spent the next hour of our road trip explaining to my grandpa who Vin Diesel was and why it was a huge deal we just met him. Met Dave Chappelle a few years back. Long story short, a friend of a friend got me and 2 friends into an after party. We were sitting at the bar when his manager offered us some shots. We talked with his manager for a while. Then Dave sat down near us. Dave was kind of sitting by himself and he looks over at us and goes, "What's going on, fellas?" And we talked to him for about an hour. We thanked him for coming to our town, talked about music, sports, all kinds of stuff. Super cool dude, one of my favorite memories. Dude, to cement that Dave is a cool guy, my friends and I were at his Chicago show when he was supposed to film a special for HBO, and it was on my actual birthday. The venue was pretty intimate and only had a few chairs surrounding the stage with everyone else standing. We got there early enough to be one of the first rows standing. Right after the opening act, he came out and immediately noticed us and asked if we were all Filipinos. Well, he definitely guessed right. He started talking about how we were his family and went right into details about his family, the food, culture, and his own family. Like having a humorous conversation during his set. Pretty surreal. Anyways, after a killer show, everyone was filtering out when one of the producers stopped us and asked if we can be in some of the B-roll footage along with Cat Williams, since he was also there checking out the show. Of course, we agreed and sat next to him. As soon as it was over, Dave was on stage smoking a joint and I told him it was my birthday that night. He asked what my name is. I said, Amour et moi. He then grabbed the microphone and with everyone else still around, he said, "Today's Amour et moi's birthday and I'm buying shots for everyone." Got to do a shot with him, one of the best random birthday moments ever. I served Daniel Radcliffe his dessert at an event and tripped and spilled some of it on him, probably due to seeing that I was serving Daniel Radcliffe, and he stood up and started apologizing profusely to me. He was very sweet and asked if I was okay. The correct British response. I like how Fame never seemed to give him a big head. From what I understand, Fame almost destroyed him. The stress of being Harry Potter and the uncertainty as the film series ended contributed to a fairly serious drinking problem. I was happy to learn that he's been sober since 2010. More power to him. Went with my parents to a function for some charity group, and we shared a table with Ice-T. Super nice guy, down to earth, and not high on himself. He has a mouth on him, but when he found out my dad is a retired preacher, never heard a bad word again the rest of the night. I ended up talking to music and how he goes from rap to metal. Man is cool and knows his about the metal and punk scene. I used to do sound for the band DRI. I was on the first Body Count tour with DRI, Exodus, and Propane. Trey, Ice-T, is an absolute sweetheart. I was struck on how reserved he was off the stage. I kind of expected him to be this crazy, over-the-top gangster guy, but he spent most of his time on his bus reading books. My brother recently told me that he still has a cassette board tape that I made of Body Count when they opened up for DRI at One Step Beyond in Santa Clara, California in 1991. When I was a teenager, I met Neil Armstrong at a retirement ceremony that my dad brought me to. It was at a museum and it was a private event. There was time for everyone to wander the museum, and my dad saw Mr. Armstrong looking at one of the planes that my dad helped design. Nobody else around. They struck up a conversation, and Neil asked me questions about what I was studying and how I felt about the work my dad did. My dad worked on classified planes when I was much younger. He seemed like such a gentle guy to me. A bunch of other men suddenly joined us and started asking him for autographs, which he declined. It seemed to snap him out of his happy mood, and he kind of shut down and walked away. At that time, I thought he was a bit of a jerk for not saying goodbye or anything, but I recently read about the hard time he had with Fame, and I guess it makes sense. My mom and sister met The Rock when he was still a wrestler. They had a couple of car seats and tons of bags, having a hell of a time getting off the plane, and people were waiting, and this massive guy offered to carry some things for them, and they happily took the help. He grabbed some bags and held the baby carrier with my niece in it, and helped them off the plane and left. After, people kept walking up to them and asking them how they knew The Rock, and they were very confused until someone explained who he was. Everything I ever hear about him, he's super cool. He did a rap from Moana with some dude interviewing him for the guy's kids because the guy's kids were massive Moana fans. I reckon he's so nice that on the airplane, I bet you he let the person next to him have the armrest. He probably thought, this isn't The Rock's elbow room, this is the people's elbow room. Bumped into Gordon Ramsay in the lift in a hotel in Hong Kong. He was very friendly. We didn't talk to him or ask for a picture. I just blurted out, "You're Gordon Ramsay," and he acknowledged and smiled. He insisted on us going first because we had our suitcases with us. Wished us a nice day, said bye several times when we saw him in the lobby again. Very friendly. Got the chance to meet him a few years back, and he really is a pretty nice guy, just has a low tolerance for nonsense. I was working on a set once where John C. Reilly acted as one of the main characters. It was a pretty small set and low budget. Not even sure if the show ever aired. We all found ourselves working closely together for the most part. I sat across from him during lunch one day, and we chatted for a bit about random stuff. The guy talks the same way he acts, which is why I think he plays such a great character in any comedy, because he quite literally plays his own attitude in many roles. Or at least it seems. But anyway, he was a very nice and down-to-earth guy. I found it hard not to giggle every time he spoke, because I just couldn't shake the image in my head of all the roles he's played. A few years ago, Helen Mirren came to my job. I worked as a weekend hostess at a Ukrainian diner in New York City's East Village, and very famous for its pierogies. I didn't know who Helen Mirren was at the time, and it was a busy Saturday brunch. I asked for her name, put it on the wait list, and let her know it would be 20 minutes. She just stood off to the side and talked with her two other companions. Never bothered me, never demanded to be seated sooner, never brought up her celebrity status. Customers kept coming up and asked if that was the Helen Mirren. My boss eventually made me seat her before everyone else. Helen looked at her watch and remarked it hadn't been 20 minutes. All in all, Helen Mirren, 10 out of 10 lovely person. I met John Candy on an airplane when I was a little kid while traveling with my family. He was a big man. He had the whole row to himself in front of us with the armrest up between seats so he could be more comfortable. The stewardess were blocking anyone from coming up and bothering him, even though they themselves were not exactly leaving him alone with what talking to him constantly and laughing at his enjoyable banter the whole trip. At some point, he got up to go to the bathroom. When he came back, he looked at me, pretended to do a double take like he was surprised, and said, "Hey, you're the cutest kid ever. Don't you talk?" The way he said it was so friendly that I just smiled and giggled. Then he had a pleasant conversation with my parents, who had been dying to talk to him the entire flight, but were too polite to bother him. Not even 2 weeks later, we heard that he had passed. Met Colin Mochrie at some obscure convention in my city. He actually talked to us for a few minutes, and I basically just fangirled about Whose Line and Royal Canadian Air Force. Really great guy. He has my absolute respect. I met Colin Mochrie at my local liquor store in Edmonton. I lived by the theater he was doing stand-up at. Super nice guy. I was so taken aback to see him in such a casual setting. He's a total sweetheart. I went to an art summer camp with his kid way back in the day. I got to meet him when all the parents came to pick everyone up at the end of camp. I must have done a double take because he smiled and said something along the lines of, "Whoops, looks like my cover is blown." He was very nice, had a lovely chat with my folks who are huge fans of his, and never made me feel awkward. I met a few celebs working as an event photographer for fundraisers from time to time. Chevy Chase. Well, the stories are true. He was a huge jerk. Jamie Lee Curtis was one of the sweetest people I've ever met, bar none, and easily the nicest celeb I met working the camera. Very considerate and thoughtful person. She kept checking with us to see if she could do anything for us or if we needed any more shots she could help with. Great sense of humor too. Jamie Lee Curtis seems to do a good job remembering her extras. They did a bit on James Corden's show and she picked out the lady that did a scene with her several years ago.